When people talk about leadership, the conversation often drifts into promises and campaign speeches. But sometimes the real clues are already in the past. Two former governors, Bola Tinubu of Lagosstate and Peterobi of Anambra State, left behind records that many Nigerians still debate today. So what actually happened during their years in office? And if those years are any indication, what might their leadership look like at the national level? Let's take a closer look at how both men performed where it truly matters. When people talk about effective governance, revenue is usually where the conversation begins. Without money flowing into the system, even the best ideas remain just that, ideas. During his years as governor of Lagos State, Bola Tinubu focused heavily on expanding the state's ability to generate its own revenue. One of the major steps was strengthening the tax structure and creating the Lagos State Revenue Mobilization Committee. The results were dramatic. Internally generated revenue reportedly grew from around 6 billion naira in 1999 to roughly 600 billion naira by 2007. His administration also signed an agreement with the federal government that allowed Lagos to receive a share of the value-added tax generated within the state, further boosting its financial capacity. Then there was the lagosstate land use charge law, which significantly increased property tax revenue reportedly by about 400%. Peterobi faced a very different environment when he became governor of Anambra State. The economic base was smaller, the structures were weaker, and revenue collection needed serious reform. His administration created the Anambra State Board of Internal Revenue, which helped raise internally generated revenue from about 1.3 billion naira in 2006 to roughly 9.6 billion by 2013. But Obi didn't just focus on collecting more money. He also worked on how government spending was managed. The Anambra State Public Procurement Law introduced stronger transparency in government contracts, helping reduce waste and save funds that would otherwise disappear through inefficient processes. Another key difference was his decision to formalize revenue collection through official government institutions rather than relying heavily on outside actors. Of course, Lagos and Anambra are very different economies. Lagos is Nigeria's commercial powerhouse, naturally capable of generating far more revenue than most states. Anambra operates on a smaller scale. Yet despite these differences, both leaders demonstrated something important: an ability to build systems that increased government income. And that's why, even when the numbers look different, both are still widely viewed as strong managers of public revenue. If revenue keeps a government running, education shapes the future that government hopes to build. Both leaders seem to understand that early on. During his time as governor of Lagos State, Bola Tinubu introduced several initiatives aimed at expanding educational opportunities and strengthening institutions. One of the notable steps was the creation of the Lagos State Scholarship Board, which supported students across different levels of education. The idea was simple but powerful: remove financial barriers so talented students could continue their studies. His administration also backed the Lagos Eco Education Project, which aimed to improve access to free education for students in public primary and secondary schools. Alongside that, funding structures such as the Lagos State University Education Trust Fund were introduced to support universities and improve infrastructure within the higher education system. Peterobi approached education with a similar sense of urgency, though the circumstances in Anambra State were quite different. When he came into office, the sector faced significant challenges. One of his first moves was to increase the state's education budget allocation from about 6.8% in 2006 to roughly 15.4% by 2014. That increase translated into visible changes across the state. More than 1,000 primary and secondary schools were renovated, and many were equipped with modern learning tools, including computer laboratories, science equipment, and improved library facilities. His administration also introduced a school feeding program that provided meals to large numbers of primary school pupils each day. Looking back at both approaches, it's clear that each governor placed real emphasis on education. Yet the argument often made is that Obi may have had a slight edge, not necessarily because the ideas were dramatically different, but because of the scale of the problems he inherited and the relatively limited resources available to him at the time. Security is one of those responsibilities that defines how people experience government in their daily lives. When Bola Tinubu governed Lagos State, he faced the challenge of managing security in Nigeria's busiest and most densely populated commercial center. One of the key moves during his tenure was the creation of the Lagosstate Security Trust Fund. The idea behind it was to provide consistent funding and support for security agencies operating within the state. Through this structure, equipment and logistical support were provided to the police and other agencies responsible for keeping the city safe. His administration also introduced traffic regulations aimed at reducing congestion on Lagos roads. While that may sound like a transportation policy, the reality is that smoother traffic flow also improved safety and reduced opportunities for certain kinds of crime on the roads. Peterobi approached the issue from a similar angle during his time in Anambra State. His administration established the Anambra State Security Trust Fund, also designed to strengthen funding for security agencies. Vehicles, equipment, and other resources were provided to the police and security operatives to help them respond more effectively to threats. One of the more visible decisions during his tenure was restricting the use of motorcycles for commercial transportation in certain areas. The move was intended to reduce both criminal activity and road accidents, which had become a growing concern in parts of the state. But the environments they governed were very different. Lagos is a massive urban center with complex security challenges tied to population density and economic activity. Anambra, on the other hand, faced its own pressures, including political agitation during Obi's years in office. These differences matter when thinking about leadership at a national level. Security strategies often depend not just on policies, but also on political alliances and economic conditions that shape how those policies are accepted and enforced. Infrastructure is often the most visible sign of leadership. Roads, bridges, hospitals. These are the things people see every day. The things that quietly shape how cities grow and how economies move. During his time as governor of Lagos State, Bola Tinubu placed heavy emphasis on expanding physical infrastructure across the state. Lagos was already Nigeria's commercial engine, but its rapid growth created enormous pressure on roads and public services. His administration pushed forward with several major road projects, including improvements to key routes such as the Lekki Expressway and the Lagos-Badagry Expressway. Work was also carried out on important transport links like the Third Mainland Bridge, which connects large parts of the city. In addition, several flyovers and pedestrian bridges were constructed across Lagos to ease traffic congestion and improve movement within the city. Beyond transportation, Tinubu's government also invested in health infrastructure. One notable project was the construction of the Lagos State University Teaching Hospital, which expanded access to healthcare and supported medical training within the state. Peterobi's time in Anambra followed a similar focus on infrastructure, though the scale and context were quite different. His administration embarked on several road construction projects designed to improve connectivity within the state. Among them were roads like the Amici to Akuzu, route the Otuocha to Eziagalu to Ubunike Road, and the Umweri to Amobia to Umwawalu Road, each contributing to better movement between communities and commercial centers. Obi also oversaw the construction of a 12-story state secretariat complex in Awka. The idea was to bring together government ministries, departments, and agencies under one structure, making administration more coordinated and efficient. Another project that drew attention was the Anambra International Cargo and Passenger Airport in Umweri. Even during its early stages, the project began attracting economic activity and signaled a long-term effort to position the state as a regional commercial hub. But the financial backdrop behind these projects is important. Lagos, during Tinubu's years in office, benefited from very strong internally generated revenue, which made large-scale infrastructure spending possible. Anambra operated with far more limited resources. That reality shaped Obi's approach, which leaned heavily toward careful financial management. Looking ahead, those different financial philosophies could influence how each leader might approach infrastructure development on a national scale. Electricity is one of those things that quietly determines whether an economy moves forward or stays stuck. Factories depend on it, businesses depend on it, and for ordinary people, daily life becomes far more difficult without reliable power. During his time as governor of Lagos State, Bola Tinubu introduced several initiatives aimed at improving electricity supply across the state. One important step was the establishment of the Lagos State Electricity Board. the board was tasked with coordinating projects related to power generation and distribution within the state. Under this structure, the government carried out projects such as installing street lighting, providing transformers, and expanding distribution lines across various communities. Tinubu's administration also initiated the construction of the acute power plant, a project expected to generate about 90 megawatts of electricity for Lagos. Peterobi pursued a similar path in Anambrastate, recognizing that power supply was central to economic growth and industrial activity. One of his key initiatives was the construction of the Anambra Integrated Power Project, designed to generate around 24 megawatts of electricity. The goal was to provide more stable and uninterrupted power to both residential areas and industrial zones within the state. Obi also created a Ministry of Power in Anambra, giving the sector a dedicated government structure to oversee generation and distribution efforts. Alongside that, transformers, distribution lines, and street lighting infrastructure were provided to various communities to strengthen local power supply. Looking at both approaches, the common thread becomes clear. Each administration recognized that electricity sits at the heart of development. While the scale of their projects differed, both leaders treated energy as a strategic priority. One reason the expectation is that either of them would place significant attention on solving Nigeria's broader electricity challenges. Beyond roads, revenue, and electricity, there is another measure of leadership that often shapes a country's future even more deeply: human capital. In simple terms, it comes down to how much a government invests in its people. During his time as governor of Lagosstate, Bola Tinubu introduced several initiatives aimed at expanding access to both education and healthcare. Programs were put in place to improve educational opportunities for students in public schools, while structures such as the Lagos State Health Management Agency were created to make healthcare more accessible and affordable for residents. Scholarship opportunities also played an important role with the Lagos State Scholarship Board, supporting students pursuing studies both within Nigeria and abroad. The broader goal was clear: strengthen the capacity of the population by improving access to learning and healthcare services. Peterobi's approach in Anambra State followed a similar philosophy. His administration introduced programs designed to expand access to education and healthcare across the state. Scholarship schemes and bursaries were made available to students in tertiary institutions, helping reduce the financial burden on families. At the same time, healthcare reforms focused on improving access for ordinary residents. The Anambra State Health Insurance Scheme was introduced to provide more affordable healthcare coverage, and several primary healthcare centers across the state were renovated and equipped to improve the quality of medical services available at the community level. When people compare both records, it becomes clear that each leader placed significant importance on developing human capital. Yet one argument often raised is that Peterobi may hold a slight advantage in this area. Part of that perception comes from his strong connection with Nigeria's youth population. With a country where young people make up a large portion of the population, the ability to engage and mobilize that demographic could play an important role in shaping national development in the years ahead. Debt is one of those quiet forces that can shape the future of a government long after a leader leaves office. During Bola Tinubu's tenure as governor of Lagos State, the state's debt profile grew significantly. Reports from that period suggest the debt rose from roughly 2 billion naira in 1999 to about 32 billion naira by the time he left office in 2007. Tinubu's argument, however, was straightforward. The borrowing was tied to infrastructure expansion and development projects intended to support Lagos as Nigeria's commercial hub. In that sense, the debt was seen as an investment meant to unlock economic growth and improve the state's long-term capacity to generate revenue. Peterobi took a very different path during his time in Anambra State. When he assumed office in 2006, the state's debt stood at about 35 billion naira. Over the course of his administration, he pursued a more frugal financial strategy. By the time he left office in 2014, that debt had reportedly been reduced to around 9 billion naira. Along the way, Obi also left behind savings for the state government that followed him. His administration focused on cutting wasteful spending, blocking financial leakages, and reducing the number of political appointees within government. Looking at both approaches side by side reveals two distinct philosophies. One leans toward borrowing to finance development projects, while the other emphasizes tight financial discipline and reduced spending. Within the comparison presented in the script, That difference is why Peterobi is often viewed as more likely to approach Nigeria's national debt with greater caution. Another interesting contrast between the two leaders appears when you look at how they approached saving for the future. During Bola Tinubu's tenure in Lagos, state structures were created to strengthen financial management within the government. One of these was the Lagos State Treasury House, an institution responsible for managing the state's finances and ensuring that government revenue was properly administered. Part of its role was to maintain financial order and ensure that a portion of state income could be preserved for future administrations. Peterobi, however, placed an even stronger emphasis on the idea of saving. His administration established the Anambra Investment and Protection Fund, which was designed to manage and safeguard a portion of the state's resources for the future. Alongside this, he also created a sinking fund specifically used to retire the state's existing debts. When you look at these two approaches side by side, the difference becomes more philosophical than procedural. Tinubu's thinking leaned toward using available resources to drive development and investment, while Obi placed heavier emphasis on preserving funds and strengthening financial buffers. In the comparison presented, that stronger commitment to saving is one reason Obi is often viewed as more conservative in managing public finances. Corruption is one of those issues that often shapes how people judge leadership, yet it is also one of the hardest areas to measure objectively. Both leaders introduced policies during their time in office that were intended to strengthen transparency and reduce misuse of public funds. During Bola Tinubu's tenure as governor of Lagos State, several reforms were introduced to improve financial accountability within the government. Measures such as procurement reforms and structured financial management systems were aimed at making government spending more transparent and reducing opportunities for corruption. These initiatives were part of broader efforts to modernize how public funds were managed in the state. At the same time, discussions about Tinubu's record in this area have not been without controversy. Critics over the years have raised allegations and suspicions regarding financial misconduct, including claims related to money laundering and other financial crimes. However, these accusations have largely remained subjects of debate and speculation, rather than conclusions established through definitive proof. Peterobi also pursued policies aimed at strengthening transparency during his time as governor of Anambra State. His administration established mechanisms intended to discourage corruption and promote accountability in government operations. Among these efforts was the creation of an anti-corruption agency within the state, as well as the signing of a Freedom of Information law designed to make government activities more open to public scrutiny. Obi also emphasized reducing wasteful spending, focusing resources on infrastructure and public services, rather than expanding government bureaucracy. In the comparison presented in the script, both leaders took steps that pointed toward improving accountability. Yet the perception that Obi may have an advantage often comes down to public trust. The argument is not necessarily that wrongdoing has been proven against Tinubu, but that Obi's political platform and reputation have made it easier for many people to see him as representing a cleaner starting point. Looking back at these records, one thing becomes clear. Both leaders governed in very different environments, yet each left behind policies that still shape conversations today. Revenue, education, security, infrastructure, and financial discipline all tell part of the story. But leadership is rarely judged by numbers alone. It's also about vision and trust. So what do you think these records really say about the kind of leadership a country might need? Share your thoughts below, and if you enjoyed this discussion, consider liking the video and subscribing for more conversations like this.